Welcome to the Fast Five Business News by Fear and Greed. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Now, Sean, today in just 5 minutes, we are going to tackle all the big economic questions, which is probably a fairly lofty goal, isn't it? What will happen with interest rates this year? Are we going to see a big rise in unemployment? And a few others, well, as many as we can fit in.
Yes, and we have only 5 minutes. Who better to do that than economist Stephen Koukoulas? You'll find him on X at The Kook. Stephen, what's going to happen with rates this year?
Happy New Year. Look, I think what we've been seeing through the course of last year is that slower rate of economic growth, the fall in inflation equals lower interest rates. So for me, a really simple rule of thumb when it comes to assessing interest rates, look at the inflation data, not the actual inflation result. That's important. But the momentum, is it going up or is it going down? And as we've seen here in Australia, in the US, in Europe, everywhere else, inflation's coming down. Interest rates cuts are being priced into markets around the world. They're being priced into Australia. So I reckon through the course of 24 and possibly into 25, let's worry about that this time next year. But I think we're going to be seeing a couple of interest rate cuts being delivered starting around mid-year when the RBA gets confirmation that inflation's about 3%, possibly a fraction lower. And the unemployment rate's 4.25%, maybe 4.5%, maybe a little bit higher. That's when they're going to start trimming rates.
Okay, so you're a little more optimistic than the Reserve Bank forecasts at this point. What about economic growth?
Yeah, the consumer side's going to be the big drag, the lead weight on the economy, because we consumers are still under the pump, I think is the Treasurer's favourite phrase, explaining that interest rate burden. The fact that the labour market's starting to soften. Of course, if you're unemployed, you tend not to spend as much as if you've got a job and you're earning money. So that's sort of going to have that reverse feedback loop into what's going to be a still troubling first half of the year for retailers and consumer-related parts of the economy. But I think that when we do get rate cuts being seriously factored into the markets and spoken about, let alone delivered, that interest rate relief will be sort of like a huge sigh. You'll probably hear the consumers around the middle of the year thinking, goodness me, I've got my head above water through this last 12 months of pain. And that in the second half of the year, we'll be seeing a better performance. In the meantime, we've got business investment doing okay. Firms are still ramping up their CapEx in relation to equipment and machinery, in relation to buildings and structures. There's shortages of warehouses and hotels. They're going to be building a lot of those sort of things. So the CapEx side, the business side of the economy will be outperforming the consumer side, but that switch might turn mid-year when we get interest rate relief and confirmation that inflation is below the rate of wages growth, so real wage increases through the year as well. Stephen,
you've had a great track record over the last couple of years on house prices, so you've got to put your name on the line again. You picked it that only fall by about 10% post-COVID, and they did that. They've bounced well last year, or in some markets they bounced pretty well. What about this year?
Look, I'm actually turning it, not a gloomster, but I think that run-up in house prices in 2023 is starting to fade. In fact, some of the numbers that we saw towards the end of 2023, the November and December numbers for Melbourne and Sydney in particular, were really coming off the boil. There's a couple of things. There's a sticker shock. Gee, a price of the house is really expensive, so let's hold back a little bit. But I think the good old-fashioned supply and demand dynamics will change. The government will trimmed immigration. Now, I don't want to overstate that because it was from an incredibly high level, that immigration's just come back a bit. So that, what do we call it, that sugar hit of demand growth from population will probably dissipate a little bit. We're seeing an increase in the number of new listings of houses for sale, so that supply side's coming back in. And when you throw in what we were discussing a minute ago, that the unemployment rate's increasing, the unemployment rate is bad news for house prices. Unemployment going up, pretty hard to get a loan when you're unemployed. So for me, house prices, okay, I've got to come to a number. Gosh, I rabbit on a bit, but we're going to probably see house prices nationwide dropping 3 to 5% in 2024. Perth, Adelaide holding up okay. The bigger falls will be Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane. That's where we're probably going to see bigger falls.
Okay. I don't know whether that's a good place to leave it or not. Sounds like bad news anyway. Stephen, thank you for being part of the Fear and Greed Summer Edition.
An absolute pleasure. Good luck for 2024. Let's hope it's a good one.
That was economist Stephen Koukoulas. You can find him at thekook.com. Love talking to Stephen. Basically, we could get some good news on rates later in the year, perhaps not so good on house prices, but he certainly knows the economy, Michael.
You show me anyone else who can, in under 5 minutes, cover interest rates, inflation, immigration, economic growth, unemployment, retail spending, consumer confidence, business spending, wage increases, and house prices.
If you got horse racing in, he would have got the whole lot.
Oh, there we go. Next year. That's it for today. Make sure you hit follow on the podcast. A new episode every day and regular business news back from January 15. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was the Fast 5 Business News by Fear and Greed.